government. And this helped. Okay, so I love this article because it straight up says these random left-wing Korean academics who just create these myths around the chaeballs. Some of it is true and some of it is not. Let's take a look. And then just goes forward to basically say everything that the left-wing Korean academics are saying is true.
To frustration,
the arrogance of the rich and powerful.
An emergency dispatcher in South Korea receives a distress call from a child aboard a ferry.
우리를 도와주세요. 배가 가라앉고 있어요.
The Seoul ferry is making a routine journey to the vacation hotspot Jeju Island, carrying 476 passengers. Most are school children and their teachers on a class trip. The dispatcher asks the boy to put the captain on the phone. If the ferry is sinking, why hasn't an adult called for help? Not all passengers understand the danger. As the boat starts to tilt, some kids yell with excitement as if they're on a theme park ride. But soon, the disaster is undeniable. Panic breaks out. Shortly after, the 6,800-ton vessel sinks. The boy who made the distress call and 300...
Chatter wasn't wrong. COVID pandemic is ongoing. Oh my God. The mere mention of COVID has brought forth the... Okay. Chatters, please. This might be your pet issue, okay? And it's a significant one. But please, we are not talking about that right now. Okay? Please shut the fuck up. I beg of you.
Other passengers, mostly...
No, I don't have fucking COVID, man! What the fuck are you talking about? Oh my God! One mentally ill chatter has caused this entire thing to collapse.
Other kids drown. The tragedy traumatizes the nation. How could this happen? Who is responsible? Initially, the crew is blamed for incompetence and cowardice. When the boat was clearly sinking, the captain told the doomed passengers to stay put in their cabins. He and several crew members fled the scene and left the kids to drown. The South Korean president says their actions are akin to murder, and the captain is sentenced to life in prison. The Korean Coast Guard is also blamed for their sluggish response and for severely fumbling the rescue mission. But then, an investigation reveals that incompetence isn't the whole story. The ferry was more than twice as heavy as it was supposed to be. It had been illegally modified to hold more cargo. More cargo, of course, means more cash. The nation is outraged that someone so clearly prioritized profit over safety. Whoever owns the ferry needs to face the music. But who is it? In South Korea, corporate responsibility can be hard to pin down. Family-run conglomerates control sprawling networks of subsidiaries. Complex structures often hide who's really in charge. Some families control so much wealth they're deemed nearly untouchable. Time and again they dodge responsibilities for crimes, yet continue to amass wealth and influence. In this video, we will look at 3 of these families, including the one responsible for the ferry tragedy. South Korea's elite families are so powerful and influential that many say they are the ones actually running the country.
Fern.
The South Korean economy is an exceptional success story. After the Korean War in the 1950s, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. Today, it is the 14th biggest economy in the world. South Korea's rapid ascent is attributed primarily to its export-led economy and to the dominance of chaebol. Chaebol are large business conglomerates that are owned and run by family dynasties. Just after the war, the country's military dictators jump-started these family businesses with capital to rebuild South Korea's key industries. The chaebol thrived and diversified into sectors like tech, finance, and manufacturing. In just a few decades, they helped transform South Korea into a global industrial power.
Okay, so one question I have, if I'm not mistaken, is that a lot of Korean society, like a lot of contemporary Korean society, and the class struggle that exists within Korean society can still be traced back to not Neo-Confucianism, which I'm not making a joke, but can be traced back to Japanese colonialism. And I was wondering if you guys have additional evidence that I can, or not evidence, but or any sort of extra reading that I can do on the matter, because why would chaebols be an advantage for economic development? Doesn't oligarchy stifle growth? From what I understand, there were ethnic Koreans that collaborated with the Japanese colonialists that played that ultimately became the chaebol families. What is this? Beyond the World War II we know. Decades after the war ended, scars left by the Japanese occupation persist for millions of Koreans and Korean Americans, including the author Alexander Chi. My family's shrouded history is also a national one for Korea. The author Alexander Chi looks back at the dark legacy of the Japanese occupation of Korea and a once unknown personal connection to it. Medicine and Empire, Texas A&M historian examines mobility and motivation, unraveling medical truths behind the 20th century Japanese colonization of Korea. No, this is not what I was looking for. I was looking for the powerful families that dominate the Korean economy were originally linked back to Japanese colonialization, and that they were the like the chaebols now are the remnants of the long-standing collaborators with Japanese colonialism. Zainichi, Korean businessman known for being the founder of the South Korean Japanese conglomerate Lotte Corporation Group, one of the largest chaebols in South Korea. During the bubble economy of Japan from the 1980s to the 1990s, he became the fourth wealthiest person in the world, according to American business magazine Forbes, setting the record for the greatest wealth ever achieved by a Korean. Driven by a lifelong desire to contribute to his homeland, South Korea, his dream of the Lotte World Tower, the sixth tallest building in the world and the highest in the Korean Peninsula, was realized in 2016, and he died in 2020. Shin Hyuk Ho. From what I understand, a lot of these business conglomerates, a lot of these families have long-standing ties back to Japanese industry, and they are like the Japanese occupation's remnants that oversaw. Fern has a video converting the chaebols. That's why I said this. I don't think that he will mention it in this video, or maybe he will. But from what I understand, like many of these like super wealthy, super powerful families that dominate, that virtually completely control the Korean economy now, are still remnants of Japanese occupation.
Powerhouse. It's often called the miracle on the Han River. South Korea's top companies, Samsung, SK, LG, and Hyundai, are all family-run chaebol, and chaebol revenues account for the majority of the country's wealth. Samsung alone is responsible for a significant part of the country's GDP. For 2024, Bloomberg Economics estimates a record high contribution from the company. According to their calculations, Samsung will likely be responsible for about half of the country's economic growth. When we work on stories like this one, we've found it really helps to visualize the data. Brilliant is an amazing tool we've used to better understand data and see the connections between number sets. Their data visualization course is an excellent way to learn how to analyze trends and make data-driven decisions, all through interactive hands-on
Ethical
lessons.
reacts.
Plus, you can learn at your own pace, right from your phone. Brilliant is a powerful platform for building problem-solving skills across math, programming, AI, and more. Their content is designed by world-class experts from MIT, Caltech, Google, and more. You can work your way up from first principles and build your understanding up to advanced concepts, all by playing with the concepts, not by rote memorization. Learning by doing in this way is proven to be up to 6 times more effective than watching lecture videos, and it works with as little as 5 minutes per day. Brilliant is offering Fern viewers a 30-day free trial and 20% off their annual subscription. Head over to brilliant.org/Fern to check it out. Alright, back to chaebol and their massive impact on the South Korean economy. All this concentrated wealth leads to a lot of concentrated power. Chaebol families enjoy a very cozy relationship with the federal government. They receive subsidies, tax incentives, and special favors. And political leaders rely on chaebol for support and advice. For decades, chaebol were widely celebrated as the pivotal drivers of South Korea's economic miracle. But the 1997 Asian financial crisis challenged the standing of the families. 13 of the top 30 chaebol went technically bankrupt, revealing the risks of an economy relying so heavily on just a few companies. Nowadays, more and more South Koreans express concerns about the dominance of these conglomerates. Not only that, as the decades passed, the public watched chaebol repeatedly caught up in scandals and crimes, embezzlement, bribery, labor law violations, health crises. For too long, the government has gone easy on these dynasties, and the people are increasingly fed up.
Yeah, it's like it's supercharged capitalism tailored around the Zaibatsu model in Japan. With very powerful families that were initially collaborators of Japanese colonialists that dominate the South Korean economy and virtually took over, had some semblance of control, or were utilized by prior Republic of Korea administrations, and now completely dominated. There's a couple different articles. This is from Yonsei University. The driving thesis behind the study is to place the formation of Korean chaebol squarely in the 1950s, corresponding directly with the outbreak and conduct of the Korean War. The Korean War provided enough new market demand for the immersion of Korea's chaebols. During and after the war, disposal of ex-Japanese enterprises, relief funds, and government reserve dollar allocations and bank finance loans provided the grounds for the formation of chaebols. This study emphasizes the need to couple the chaebols' rent-seeking behaviors with their divergent strategies and abilities to utilize and maximize productivity. It substantiates from case studies that, contrary to conventional wisdom, political factors are neither the sole nor majority cause for the growth of these chaebols. Rather, their growth owes largely to the government's economic policies and their economic strategy and the market adaptability. In short, the emergence of Korean chaebols originates in the 1950s in the war's aftermath, and the developmental trajectory of chaebols is characterized by an economic factor, pulled continuity, rather than political factor, pushed discontinuity. This isn't what I was specifically looking for. I'm talking about the who became these powerful families and what they did before the 50s is what I'm looking for. But anyway, but yeah. Would you say BlackRock has a similar level of power in the US? No. Yes, BlackRock is tremendously powerful, but the whole point of chaebols is that power is concentrated in the hands of a few families rather than, it's still bad, and it's a different version of capitalism. But no, BlackRock is not remotely comparable because, yeah, Walmart would be a closer example to the chaebols, but I think I would say that the chaebol structure is akin to, or closest equivalence to the chaebol structure in the Western world would probably be like the Gilded Age, like the different families that owned ginormous swaths of American industry, like the oil barons and those who owned the railroads and steel, rather than BlackRock or whatever. Yeah, the Rockefeller, Vanderbilts, the robber barons. But yeah, Lee Byung-chul, founder of Samsung Group. The history of South Korea after 1945 was tremendous and almost unprecedented economic success. The country, which was recently, as 1960, was universally seen as a basket case. A nation without any economic prospects was transformed into one of the world's major economies within the lifespan of just one generation. This impressive transformation was led by large business conglomerates known as chaebol. The South Korean economy has been dominated by these vast enterprises, producing everything from super tankers and passenger cars to petrochemicals. The majority of these conglomerates are essentially grossly overgrown family businesses. Each chaebol was, and most still are, owned and managed by a particular extended family. There are black myths around the chaebol as well. According to the left in South Korea, the chaebol are an embodiment of evil capitalist forces. It is. It quite literally is. It's not a black myth, Korea Times. Their rise was possible through collusion with corrupt politicians and greedy, ruthless profiteers. Also correct. According to this myth, the corporations were established by former pro-Japanese collaborators and grew only because of the preferential treatment granted to them by the South's military dictators. I like that they just say it's a myth and then they just describe what happened. So were the chaebol agents of economic breakthrough or whose efforts brought affluence, education, and health to millions of Koreans? Or were they an incarnation of corruption and backroom dealings? As is usually the case, both myths contain a kernel of truth, but are wrong on some important counts as well. Let's see how they're wrong. Nowadays, the best known and arguably most powerful group is Samsung, and it seems that its history is best illustration of the history of Korean business with its dirty deals and brilliant breakthroughs. It is often stated by left-wing intellectuals in Korea that the nation's chaebol were once founded by pro-Japanese collaborators. It is partially true, but there is one important caveat. With most present-day chaebols were very humble businesses before 1945. They were very humbly collaborating with the Japanese. Their founders had cozy relations with colonial administrators. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to run anything more than a market stall. But none of them were big-time collaborators in that era. Those Korean businessmen who were most notorious for their collaboration did not fare well after 1945. Samsung was typical in this regard. Its founder, Lee Byung-chul, was born into a landlord's family. He would briefly study at Waseda University in Japan, but didn't graduate and came back home, where he was involved in a number of family business ventures. In 1938, exactly 30 years old, Lee established a small trading company in his native city of Daegu. It specialized in imports and exports and eventually began to produce alcoholic beverages and foodstuff. For investment, he used 30,000 won, which was given to him by his family. At a time, it was equal to 2,000 average monthly salary, so it roughly had the purchasing power of about $5 million in today's money. Just a small $5 million loan from his family after traveling to Japan and you know, being a humble small business guy with a small business loan of $5 million. The company was called Samsung, or 3 stars. Indeed, the Samsung logo included the depiction of the 3 stars until 1993, when the company decided to go international big time and get rid of its old symbolic heritage. Most of the chaebol were once established by scions of land-owning families. However, while the inherited wealth did matter enormously, it did not guarantee anything. Many thousands of landlords' sons joined the race, but merely a few hundred succeeded, and only a few dozen struck it really big, becoming chaebol owners. A lot of other qualities, both good and bad, were necessary to develop small family businesses into a huge conglomerate. With the collapse of the colonial regime, Lee made a brave and smart move. In 1947, he moved the company's headquarters to Seoul. For all practical purposes, Seoul had become Korea itself. The nation's capital was the only place where names and fortunes were made. Both the company and its founders survived the turbulent years of the Korean War. Not a foregone conclusion, since many an aspiring entrepreneur faced North Korean firing squad in those times. Dude, what is this writing? Lee knew how to succeed. He maintained cozy relations with the Ri Sung-man government, And this helped. Okay, so I love this article because it straight up says these random left-wing Korean academics who just create these myths around the chaeballs. Some of it is true and some of it is not. Let's take a look. And then just goes forward to basically say everything that the left-wing Korean academics are saying is true. Like virtually everything. So what's the myth? Not to sound stupid, but is this propaganda? I mean, it's Korea Times. Obviously, they're not, card-carrying commies. He maintained cozy relations with Ri Sing-man government, and this helped him secure the most profitable contracts, often related to foreign trade. Samsung also produced sugar and textile. By the late 1950s, Lee was reputed to be the richest man in Korea, but was also seen as a symbol of corruption. Therefore, we should not be too surprised that the downfall of Ri in 1960 had major negative impact on Samsung's standings. When in 1961, the Korean army staged a military coup and then lauded by the army propagandists as the May 16th revolution, Lee was overseas in the house of his Japanese wife. He had a Korean wife too, but East Asian businessmen have never been known for their phobia of polygamy. He maintained 2 households almost openly. The myth they're saying is that there were thousands of these kinds of families that were collaborators, but only a few succeeded, so they're trying to trash the whole argument. Yeah, the ones that cozied up to the ruthless South Korean puppet state, literally created by the American government, ended up succeeding, as opposed to the other ones who didn't suck up hard enough. In Tokyo, he learned that he was the very top of the list of corrupt businessmen to be investigated by the new regime. After some deliberation, he came back to Seoul to hold meetings with Major General Park Chung-hee, head of the emerging military regime. They made a deal. All of his past misdeeds would be forgiven so long as he would be willing to work towards the major goal of the new government, that being the transformation of Korea into an industrial nation. Park and his group were firm believers in economic efficiency and growth. They wanted to remake Korea, then one of the poorest nations of all of Asia, into an industrial powerhouse. Back then, this would have been seen as a pipe dream, since Korea had no resources, no capital, no expertise, even though it did have an abundance of cheap and disciplined labor. One other thing that Korea had was a launching pad for American intervention in the region. So that certainly helped, because everything that the South Korean government did was funded by the American government. So there's that. That part of it is also, I think fairly important. Funded by the American government, either by way of continued collaboration with Japanese industry, which was also controlled by the American government at the time, and still is to a certain degree, or directly funded by the American government, because it was a bulwark against. And this might come as a surprise to you guys, because we've seemingly talked quite a bit okay, about American intervention and its necessity, given the much more dangerous prospect of Soviet alignment and the scary USSR interference, or not even interference directly, but like influence sometimes, or not even sometimes, almost all the time, due to a popular left-wing mobilization and movement. Interesting to think about. Korea's government decided to remake the country into a huge factory which would import raw materials and technology and then export the finished products overseas. But Park believed that only big companies could succeed in the international market, so he handpicked a few dozen firms which were given major privileges and government support. So this is further evidence, it seems, to what the lame, libtarded, left-wing academics in Korea are saying about the chaeballs. Anyway, let's get back to the Fern video. The Nutgate one is really funny. I mean, these are some of the more like modern versions of like very obvious corruption, some of which we've covered extensively on this broadcast. Nutgate is really funny, obviously. There's also probably numerous instances where they talk about like the daughters of wealthy politicians and chaebol members or whatever cheating in school. That's the two things that Koreans get really mad about: cheating in school and chaebols behaving in an insane manner in broad daylight in public, oftentimes, maybe even sometimes on U.S. soil, like Nutgate.
In December 2014, Korean Air Vice President and heiress Heather Cho had an infamous meltdown. It was over a couple of macadamia nuts. A flight attendant had the gall to serve her nuts in a bag instead of on a plate. Cho shouted abuse. She then called over the cabin crew chief and made him kneel to ask for forgiveness. Under her orders, the passenger plane returned to the gate, where the cabin crew chief was fired on the spot. If you're not Korean and you hear about this story, it might just seem funny or absurd. But in South Korea, it was fuel to the flame of growing public frustration. Yet another reminder of chaebol leaders' arrogance and entitlement. They took their rage to social media and later the streets. At first, Korean Air tried to downplay the incident. They released a statement saying that because Cho's executive role was to oversee cabin service, it was only natural that she would discipline an offending staff member. But people weren't having it. The public already had issues with the Korean Air dynasty and their shameless antics. A few years prior, Cho's brother was investigated for pushing an elderly woman. Her father has been convicted of tax fraud, and Cho herself was criticized for strategically giving birth to her twin sons in the US, which exempted them from South Korea's compulsory military service.
Yeah, it took the fucking Korean Airlines, I think, 2 years to restore the fucking improperly fired employee, by the way. Here's another funny aspect of this. When chaebols get punished, because they do, which is weird, and in comparison to what happens in America, where they never get punished, chaebol style people. But when they do get punished, they still retain control over their companies. Like they'll be on the corporate board of like 8 different parts of the holding firm, and they'll be removed from like one of the 8 different parts of the holding firm corporate boards, and they still get to be the boss from prison. And then when they come out from prison, they go back to their original positions.
Eventually, Cho tearfully apologized and resigned from her post.
죄송합니다.
She was then convicted of violating aviation safety and abusing her power. She faced up to 15 years in prison, but was given the minimum sentence of 12 months. She only served 5 of those before a judge reduced her sentence. The chaebol's influence runs deep, all throughout the government, even to the very top. Already in the 2012 South Korean presidential election, a key debate was on how to limit the power of these families. Park Geun-hye became South Korea's first female president.
2013년 2월 25일 대통령 박근혜.
When she took office, many worried it would be business as usual. Her father was Park Chung-hee, the military leader who took power in a 1961 coup. He is considered the chief architect of the chaebol system, and Geun-hye became her father's stand-in first lady when she was 22 after a North Korean assassin had killed her mother. Park Chung-hye's admirers credit him for the miracle on the Han River. His critics remember the cruelty of his iron-fisted rule and his imprisonment of dissidents. One of these was Miss Park's key rival in the election. His name is Moon Jae-in, a former human rights lawyer and anti-authoritarian activist during the dictator's reign. Now, in 2012, the ex-dictator's daughter campaigned on a more business-friendly platform than her liberal opponent Moon. She was focusing on reform rather than punishment. Her stance was that chaebol might be unruly, but with the right reforms, they could play fair. But then, Sivol happened. This incident was much bigger than run-of-the-mill embezzlement or tax evasion. Faced with a furious and traumatized public, Park vows to bring the accountable people to justice. After analyzing complex financial records, the Yu family is eventually found to own the ferry. The Yus are well known for their eccentric patriarch, a reclusive businessman slash cult-like pastor slash aspiring artist named Yu Byung-on. The president says he and his family are the root cause of this calamity and issues a warrant for their arrest. Yu Byung-on keeps a low profile and is rarely seen in public. He's known as the millionaire with no face, and now he's nowhere to be found. President Park kicks off the largest manhunt in South Korean history to find Yu. She mobilizes the military and nearly 10,000 police officers to raid the headquarters of the Evangelical Baptist Church of Korea, a religious sect that Yu co-founded in 1962. Yu is a charismatic and inspiring speaker. He was able to attract a substantial following and elicit substantial favors. By the 1970s, Yu's growing church became a money-making enterprise. He persuaded members to donate to or invest in companies linked with the church. Those companies sold a wide range of products, from organic milk to auto parts to anima kits. These companies made Yu and his church very rich. At that time, South Korea was still poor and money for investment was scarce. The government granted capital to only a select number of families, but Yu's approach of raising funds through evangelizing allowed him to rapidly...
Okay, so this is CIA, right? Like, it has to be, right? I feel like anytime I hear about like a fucking pastor in Korea, the CIA has his tentacles in there. I feel like it has to be. And no, I don't mean the KCIA. I mean like the CIA, which is also the KCIA. The Korean CIA is literally just still the CIA.
grow his businesses even without governmental support. By the 1980s, his business network was considered a mini chaebol. But then controversy hits. In 1987, 32 alleged members of Yu's church were found bound, gagged, and dead in the attic of a factory near Seoul. The authorities ruled the deaths as a murder-suicide pact linked to debts they couldn't pay. After the victims' financial records were probed, money was found going to Yu. He was investigated for suspicion that he was behind the alleged suicides, but the charges were dismissed due to lack of evidence. Nevertheless, courts did find evidence that he was using church members' money and properties to enrich his businesses. In 1992, Yu was jailed for fraud. Once released from jail, Yu attempts to restore his image. He gets really into nature photography and starts exhibiting his work under the pseudonym Ahe. He pays top museums worldwide like the Louvre to display his pictures and tries to build a reputation as an art star who is rarely seen in public. All, it appears, as an effort to distract from the negative press. He also continues to be invested in various businesses. One of his more profitable ventures is this shipping company. At least $3.8 million went directly to the Yu family. It's the same company that owns and runs the Seawall ferry. 2 months after the ferry sank, Korean police raid Yu's compound. Hundreds of sect members are protesting the raid and attempt to build a blockade. A large banner reads, "We'll protect Yu Byung-yeon even if 100,000 church members are all arrested." Helicopters swirl overhead. Some cult members threaten to fight the police. Others vow to die as martyrs. But after combing...
Much of the fish in American sushi restaurants caught by the Moonies? Yes. The Moonies are responsible for bringing sushi to the United States of America and still operate many of the sushi restaurants and directly sell to almost all of the sushi restaurants.
The massive compound, the cops leave empty-handed. They don't know it yet, but Yu is hiding in a secret closet 300 kilometers away in his holiday home. A few days after the raid, and 18 days after Yu was last spotted, a farmer finds a dead body face up in an...
And the Moonies are linked to that one guy in Texas with his gun cult. He's not in Texas, he's in Pennsylvania, but yes. The Church of Iron, I think it's called, right? The fuck was it called? The one where they fuck the guns and like get married to the guns? The Gunfucker Church. It's not Texas. You would think it's Texas, but I think it's in Pennsylvania. Yeah. Rod of Iron Ministries. Oh, they moved. Apparently, they're not in Pennsylvania anymore. They moved to Tennessee. Yeah, the Gunfucker Church. The Church of Iron Rod is the founder's second son, I think. He's building a compound in Texas. Oh, inevitably he would move to Texas, but...
An orchard. It's in an advanced state of decomposition, almost skeletal. It's at first impossible to tell who it is. The corpse is wearing expensive Italian clothes and is surrounded by bottles of rice wine, a bottle of shark liver oil, and a book written by you. After a 3-day autopsy and over a month of investigation, authorities confirmed that it is indeed you. A cause of death is never determined. More and more damning evidence keeps coming out about the government and the ferry. Auditors discovered that Coast Guard officials apparently turned a blind eye to the ferry's glaring safety problems after getting courted by Yu's shipping company over drinks at lavish dinners. Some admitted to letting the ferry pass through inspection points, only guessing from a distance whether the ferry was overloaded. A major factor in its excessive weight turned out to be a marble art gallery on board. Yu personally insisted on adding it to display his artwork on the ferry. One man's greed had sunk the seawall ferry, and as more and more South Koreans were starting to believe, the government's negligence had let it happen. Some Korean families like Yu's are wealthy enough to convince government employees to turn a blind eye to their misdeeds like fudging ferry inspections. But the really powerful ones can command much more than that. And one family holds truly unmatched power, casting a shadow over all others. In the months after the Seawall tragedy, candlelight vigils turn into weekly protests, calling for truth and accountability for the government's involvement in the disaster. Frustration grows and people start demanding for Park to be impeached. The government cracks down hard in response. Police use water cannons and pepper spray on thousands of protesters. Authorities illegally collect intelligence on mourning families in order to suppress anti-government protests. But anger and frustration continue to grow. And in 2016, another huge scandal erupts. It reveals that President Park is most certainly not the leader who will rein in chaebol power. In fact, she's especially cozy with South Korea's most powerful chaebol families. Illegally cozy. President Park is found entangled in a web of backroom deals with leaders of Samsung and other corporate executives. Park accepted substantial bribes in exchange for governmental favors. Samsung made a $36 million donation to her best friend's nonprofit, which Park rewarded by greenlighting a controversial merger. This merger gave the Samsung family even more control over the country's most powerful chaebol. The head of the family is Lee Jae-young, often called the Crown Prince of Samsung. The bribery scandal toppled Park's presidency.
피청구인 대통령 박근혜를 파면한다.
She was the first ever president of South Korea to be impeached. She was sentenced to 24 years in prison and fined $17 million. Lee Jae-young was also arrested and sentenced to 2.5 years.
I think one of the ways in which like America does things differently is I think they do a better job of like one, propagandizing some of the more destructive elements of capitalism. And I think they also do a better job of spreading out the pain or spreading out the harm, because when it's so isolated or so centralized to a couple families, it's like easier to just be like, those are the bad guys. They literally lord over us. Whereas in America, America doesn't do anything better. No, I think they do capitalism a little bit better than Korea, in the way that there is that same level of like very obvious corruption, which they have streamlined and legalized. But you don't even get any sort of legal repercussions for this sort of behavior in America. I'll give you evidence to this. This sort of tragedy occurs in the United States of America regularly. One example of it is the Baltimore was the Baltimore collapse of the bridge. Who went to jail over that? Identical situation, except for cargo transport. Obviously, like all the goals of all of the very same profit-seeking, corner-cutting attitudes exist. Okay, where those ships were way too they were way too slammed, way too heavy, operating on tight margins. They blew up a fucking bridge in the process, and there was not even a question about like who was responsible for it. There's also, in terms of like the Sackler family, okay, one of the only notable instances I can think of where like a very wealthy, very powerful family was directly held responsible only because they were responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. Okay, not like 100, not 400, hundreds of thousands of deaths, right? They had direct intervention, direct involvement, directly lied, like played a role in lying to medical professionals. They also played a role in basically changing the way that like the American healthcare structure works in terms of creating like pain relief clinics and things of that nature. And the family itself did not withstand significant legal scrutiny. Like no criminal punishments were dished out. They're still allowed to operate. There was an initiative to basically take the fucking take their wealth away, and even that didn't happen, right? So I guess my point is, these guys have like some semblance of a legal structure where they try to like at least fake punish the people responsible for it, like powerful people. We don't even fucking do that. We don't even do that in America. And also on top of that, because there are so many pain points, so many different vectors of harm in daily American existence at the behest of, profit margins, and it's held in the hands of maybe like the top 10% of wealth rather than like directly six families, that Americans don't see it as like these almost mythical deity style figures that are ruining your fucking lives in the way that like I think Koreans can still point to a couple individuals for the anger, and even the government for their collaboration with these individuals. So, something to consider. I think American capitalism does a better job of hiding the people that basically ruin your lives for profit.
Park is succeeded by Moon Jae-in. He promises not to pardon anyone convicted of corruption, but the influence of Samsung and Lee Jae-yong proved difficult to curb. Moon ends up pardoning him after just 1 year. The new president
only one low-level vice president dork from Credit Suisse went to jail for 2008, even though he at worst did no more unscrupulous shit than your average trader at Goldman or AIG. Chad thinks you mean better as in good, but you mean better as in smarter. Yeah, no, it's more evil is what I'm saying. They do a better job of hiding this shit. In Korea, you still have the fantasy of breaking down the manor walls of some oligarchs as a form of revolution. In the US, is entirely diffused in public consciousness. Yeah. Many Americans privately want to be those elite families. I'm sure that there is plenty of aspiration. I'm sure that there's plenty of aspiration amongst the Korean population. That's why they're so fucking... That's why they so hyper focus on this like meritocratic myth that is supposed to exist in Korean society. That's why they get extra mad when someone cheats at school, okay? Because for them, there's this false belief that like they can get a leg up if they study super hard, go to the best schools, and then inevitably get a solid job at Samsung. That one day they will be able to reach maybe not the chaebol status, but at least like financial comfort. That's why they fucking lose their shit when someone cheats at school. They go crazy over it, okay? Like when they have like a fail son or a failed daughter of a politician or some wealthy family go to a school that they didn't deserve to go to. They're like, oh my God, they fucking turn tables. They flip tables over that shit. So I guess my point is wait, hold on. There is still definitely this wanting for being a part of the powerful in Korea as well, but I think they just have like more due to the concentrated amount of power directly in the hands of a couple families. I think there's a better way to portray these guys as villains.
Admits that those who condemn Lee's crimes are in the right, but that the nation needs him. The economy relies too heavily on Samsung to have its leader in jail. With so much power, Lee Jae-young is effectively above the law. And in some ways, this pardon was just business as usual. Lee's father had also been convicted of bribery and fraud in the 90s, but hadn't served a day of his sentence. A 2022 poll recorded 70% of the public approving the decision. Experts say it's because people fear an economic downturn. They believe if Samsung does well, South Korea does well. Lee continues to occupy a top position at Samsung, now as CEO of Samsung Electronics. He's also the country's richest person. Already before, President Moon unexpectedly pardoned the former President Park after she served 5 years of her sentence. The reason he gave was to promote the people's unity. The dictator's daughter and the crown prince of Samsung both walk free. And while many everyday South Koreans express frustration with corruption, chaebol still hold considerable appeal. They're by far the most desirable places to work. Top chaebol offer much higher wages than regular companies.
Hello?
Oh,